you are able to use contractions, first-person pronouns, that kind of thing. Whereas with formal writing, of course, it's a little bit different. You're writing more for an academic audience. It's usually for your teacher, and it's in the form of an essay. So I thought that we could have a little bit of fun with this one, as fun as English assignments go, though, of course, I know. So here it is. I'll just go through it. This assignment is an imaginative or creative piece of writing based on King Lear. The assignment should be a maximum of 250 to 300 words. So essentially that's one page. I don't really like giving minimums because if I'm saying that it's about one page, I'm definitely not counting words, believe it or not. I have better things to do than to count the amount of words you use. But when you're asking me about minimums, I'm a little worried because then it makes me think that, you know, if you've only got 50 words, that's not going to cut it in terms of content and structure to be evaluated. You've got to give me enough that I can evaluate, okay? So 250 words is approximately a page. And I don't think that's too taxing for an informal writing assignment. You definitely do not have to write using what people refer to like Shakespeare's English or Elizabethan English. I don't expect that, but if you would like to try, then you could definitely do that. Sometimes people throw in a couple of thys and thous and they feel like they're Shakespearean. So, I mean, you can find a balance between the two. If you're absolutely not comfortable trying to write in verse, I don't expect that. You can definitely still maintain the integrity of the original, even if you don't use all the Elizabethan language. So that's entirely your judgment call, whether you want to try to sound like Shakespeare or not. Be sure that your creative accurately depicts the characters the characters as they appear in the play, especially their tone and diction. So I don't want you to use verbiage, register that is out of character. So for instance, if you're going to portray Cordelia, I would not give her an evil character revelation with a very dark, morose tone, because that would not match the character that we know in the play. Okay, so I just want you to be sure that whoever you're depicting, it makes sense and it follows what we've been presented through with their character in the text. So no outlandish events like alien abductions. That really has no place in this particular assignment. Not that they aren't cool, but to have aliens in pre-Christian King Lear time, it's like completely out of the realm, I think, of possibility. And it wouldn't make sense. So it has to fit the setting and the themes of the play. Your assignment choice is to be drawn from the following options. And because there's 7, I'm sure there's something here that will appeal to each of you. So the first choice is actually 2. You could write a prologue or an epilogue. A prologue is obviously something that occurs before the text. So in this event, you could give context, let's say, into the relationship of the sisters or the sisters with King Lear. If you provided a little background that you obviously create in your mind, some imaginative world that determines the conditions that we start reading the play from just before the love contest, that would be quite interesting to me. Also, an epilogue would be a summary of events that occur after the play. Like the next day or 2 weeks later. I wouldn't do something like 10 years down the road. That's kind of out of place. But what happens after the play? Who is there to restore order? How do they restore order to the kingdom? There's a few questions that we have at the end. What happened? What is the fate of certain characters? What happens to Edgar? What happens to the fool? What happens to Kent? So you could create this whole other narrative about what happens to one of those characters, or like I said, the origins of some of the conflict at the beginning. This should be written in prose because an epilogue or a prologue is going to be rehashing a story. There will be no dialogue in it, and it should give context to the play before it begins or discuss the subtext at the end of the play. So life after the catastrophe. You don't have to do both of those. It would be one or the other, either the prologue or the epilogue. Okay, number 2, this option requires you to write 2 letters. In Act 2, Scene 1, line 98, Regan blames Lear's riotous knights for encouraging Edgar to murder Gloucester. Regan tells of a letter she has received from Goneril, in line 101, giving further details of the unruly behavior of Lear's 100 followers, which are the knights. Write the letter. In Act 2, Scene 1, Regan tells of receiving letters from Lear and Goneril, which explain the growing rift between father and daughter. So essentially, we don't get to read those letters. I want you to fill in the blanks. Write Lear's letter to Regan, in which he offers his version of events. So we know that Goneril is upset with how Lear's knights are acting, but we don't really know from his point of view what's really going on. So you're going to be able to write those letters to clarify. Now, just so you know, because the whole assignment has a 250 to 300 word limit, you wouldn't be doing 2 letters of 250 words each. You would divide it, and maybe one letter has 100 words, one letter has 150 words, or however you want to do it, okay? So you're not going to double the work, you're just going to split the work. Number 3, Act 2, Scene 2. Kent reads a letter he has received from Cordelia. That's actually what we read yesterday. Remember when he ends up in the stocks? She has been informed of Kent's disguise and of his activities, his obscured course, and she intends to restore order in the country, give losses their remedies. Write Cordelia's letter, keeping in mind that she is well aware that her letter could be intercepted by those who would oppose her. So you might want to use some veiled language when you're writing this and not be so direct, maybe using some metaphors that Kent would know, but perhaps an interceptor wouldn't know. Number 4. In Act 3, Scene 2, I hope some of this doesn't plot spoil, but it might. The fool makes a bizarre prediction that corruption, immortality, and unhappiness will come to Britain, which used to be called Albion in ancient times, followed by a golden age in which customary evils will be reversed. Write your own prediction of what will happen to the future of Britain with Lear's entire family deceased, which is essentially what tragedies do. They get rid of any of the corrupt characters in order for order to be restored at the end of the play. So what is Britain's future going to look like now that Lear is gone? So who will be in charge? How will they change things? What will it look like? Number 5, in Act 4, Scene 2, Edmund only appears in Scene 2 of Act 4 and speaks just one line, yours in the ranks of death. Imagine that Shakespeare thought of giving him a short soliloquy in which he could comment on his progress, on how he views his relationships with Regan and Goneril, on his feelings about his father, and on his hopes for the future. Situate this speech after his isolated line. So for this one, because it is a soliloquy, I would like your best attempt to write in verse, to try to do, I'm not asking iambic pentameter because that would be quite a feat, but if you could, to try to aim for 10 syllables per line, so at least it would try to mimic the pattern that Shakespeare uses when he's writing, okay, which is iambic pentameter. Number 6, throughout the play, minor unnamed characters appear and speak. A captain, an old man, a gentleman, and some servants. Other nameless characters appear but do not speak, for example, knights, soldiers, attendants. Give one of these ordinary people a voice. Invent a role for yourself as a low-status character in Lear's Britain. Recount what you know of the life and death of King Lear. Your story may be fragmentary, a mixture of briefly glimpsed events, overheard conversations, and gossip. It's going to kind of be like an oral story passed down, like a bit of a mythology. So you could talk about some of the circumstances surrounding that. And as stories get passed down, they change, certain things get exaggerated. So this is coming from you and you're telling a story about Mad King Lear around the campfire. How would the story change from its original and develop from there? Number 7, choose a moment in the play, whether after Act 1, Scene 1, just before Act 4, Scene 6, or just after or near the beginning of Act 5, Scene 3, when Cordelia and Lear have become prisoners of war, and write for Cordelia a soliloquy equal to that of Edgar's in Act 2, Scene 3, which we're going to talk about today. From Cordelia, we never really get that soliloquy. We never really see her perspective on her sisters. We don't really get to see those internal thoughts materialize. So what is she really thinking and feeling? And you get to fill in the gaps for that. Okay. I will post a rubric. I just altered this assignment because I used to get students to do a statement of intent. So I've taken that out because that's unnecessary. So I will get the rubric uploaded as soon as possible. It's just kind of tedious to copy and paste it into the Google Doc. So I will take care of that most certainly before it is due. So are there any questions about those options for you?
Okay,
sorry. Well, that's okay. Sabrina will do ladies first, and then Jeffrey.
If we pick a letter, are the letters supposed to be in verse or prose?
Typically, letters are written in prose.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Unless you want to be really fancy and write your letter in verse, but that they're typically written in prose. Okay.
Miss?
Yes.
So if you're writing a prologue, can you like name the kingdom and the places of the kingdom yourself?
Like if you wanted to, what do you mean? Like change names?
No, not change names. Like change the like King Lear's. We only know this King Lear's kingdom, but we don't know his like kingdom's name or anything about like the places or stuff that's in the kingdom.
Right. Okay. Typically, it would be like all of Britain. So his kingdom is actually what we know now as England. It would have been back then known as Albion. So like the entire island, that would have been his kingdom. When it is divided between Albany and Cornwall, imagine those would be like regions, like York region, Toronto, Peel. Okay, so Albany would have been like the jurisdiction around the castle would have been the center, but Albion would have been, I guess, its own region. Cornwall would have been a region. You'd have like Liverpool would have been a region. So you could refer to them as those names, but it is, in this sense, it would have been referred to as Albion, which is now modern day England. If that makes sense.
So you're saying like this is the prologue, not like the epilogue, like the prologue.
Right. So if you wanted to refer to any places in the prologue or epilogue, it is in Albion. That's the country.
Okay. Thank you, miss.
Any other questions about that? Okay, well, the next few days, you want to review it, think about it. You can ask me questions as they come up. Allie, go ahead.
I know you said you don't have a specific date when you want it due, but do you know how much time we'll have after we finish King Lear to complete this?
Well, here's the thing. We're going to kind of have to go into high gear to get it done. I'm kind of expecting our Shakespeare unit to be approximately 3 weeks. That includes a test and time to do some group work for a presentation. So I'm figuring if we can finish the play hopefully this week, then we have analysis and time to do some stuff next week. And that's going to be it. So if it's assigned now, I would probably, I wouldn't have it due the exact same time that you're going to be working on your oral presentation. But if I did give you, let's say over a few weekends, it will be due probably when we're already in the next unit. So I just don't want, things to be due too far into our next unit, because it's going to take us probably 1 day or maybe 2 days to read our next text. And then we're going right into essay writing. So I don't want you to have an essay on top of a creative assignment. So I'm going to try to work it out so that you'll have enough time to have the creative do, or even just a few days to work on it, that you can do your oral presentation plus the creative. In terms of the timeline, I did say that they are approximate. You have to understand that in some courses, I have a very rigid timeline because I have to get things done. In this course, I know that some of the texts are going to take longer to read than others. So if I said 2 or 3 weeks, I mean, you can't hold me on that. If I need more time with this unit because you want more help, more time, we have to take more time. And the next unit, I'm going to take some time away. It's kind of whatever works for us. So let's not worry too much about, she said exactly 2 weeks for the next unit. Well, it may not take us 2 weeks to analyze the next unit. I can tell you for sure it will not. So I'm going to kind of use whatever time we have in the most appropriate way that I know how. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Right, so whether it's 2 or 3 weeks, we will make it work. But I will most certainly give you lots of time to work on things before they're due, okay? At least now you can start thinking. So if you know for sure you want to write a prologue, you can get on that. Even if you know you want to write an epilogue, you can start brainstorming some things that you want to address, okay? All right, I guess without any further ado, we should start reading the play. We can take up some of the questions. I think I left you guys with scenes 2 and 3, so I'm just going to pull up the questions and we can take those up. So okay, so let's talk a little bit about, we'll take up the first question. How does Edmund trick his brother Edgar into fleeing? Can someone break that one down for me? How did that result?
Yes. Can I answer that one?
Sure, of course.
Just a sec. I believe. Okay, here. He informed Edgar that their father was incredibly angry with him for some particular reason, and that instead of confronting him, it would be best to just wait until he calms down. And I think in this scene specifically, he tries overwhelming Edgar with like the possibility of war between the two dukes, and the fact that their father is like, onto them and close within, like he's like physically close to them and like going to chase him down, so he has to run away.
Yes, very good. So if you did want to go back to that passage, you could look basically when Edgar enters on line 20 to about line 35, just those 15 lines, or sorry, 36, they're very quick. He gives him, there's a lot of instructions, a lot of yelling to different people, which, as you said, bombards Edgar and doesn't allow him to sort of properly deal with or confront the situation, because it just becomes so dangerous. So he tricks him by overwhelming him and framing him, and that's why Edgar flees. Okay, so very good. Act 2, Scene 2. How do Ken's actions with Oswald characterize him as a plain dealer? And what that means is just basically he's extremely blunt and direct. So how is he with that whole interaction with Oswald? How is he characterized as being very blunt, direct, and plain?
I suppose I'll answer this. I guess like during their interaction, he doesn't try to cut any corners. He's kind of like straight to the point. He goes to the point like so fast that Oswald himself doesn't fully understand what's going on. So like Kent doesn't like waste his time basically.
Absolutely. And if you want to go back, I mean, there's nothing better than a good Shakespearean insult, in my opinion. So if you look back on lines 13 to 22, he just absolutely bombards him by essentially calling him pretentious, that he grovels, he's a low life, He'll take any opportunity that he possibly can. He's an opportunist. He's manipulative. He's base. A lot of the things that we don't value in people, that's what he accuses Oswald of being. So this makes it seem that this is what got Kent in trouble the first time with Lear, by being blunt and direct. And this is also what gets him in trouble now. But I think it's also it can be an admirable quality in people to tell the truth. But sometimes, obviously in this situation, telling the truth as it is may not be favorable. Sometimes you do need to do it with tact. So how might Kent's line, "Nothing almost seems miracles but misery," serve as a motto for the play?
I guess I'll answer this again. We've already seen this kind of twice, where the concept of nothing is meant to mean like a lot more than what meets the eye. But like for example, we're talking about like when Cordelia says nothing when Lear asks to like I guess flatter him in a sense. It seems like miracles because she's trying to convey something that's more powerful than words, but it kind of ends in her own misery because Lear fails to see that nothing is actually something else.
Okay, good. Anyone else want to branch on that idea?
I also wanted to add that it also serves as a motto for the play because it puts fate versus free will into question by mentioning miracles.
Okay. So you're looking thematically, I like that. There was a theme that sort of popped into my mind that I think could draw a parallel. The idea, oh, sorry, does somebody else, I just heard a microphone go on. If someone else wants to offer their opinion, I'd love that.
I think that theme you were thinking about might have been like the Wheel of Fortune. I think that's what I thought, at least.
Okay, explain.
Because it seems like this made me think of Kent and Lear and how they went from such high positions and now they're just, it seems like they have nothing else to lose. And the fact that he says nothing almost seems miracles but misery, I think he's talking about like people who are truly as like miserable as them. Like the only way they can, like the only direction they have left, the only path they have left is to like go up, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I would say that the Wheel of Fortune would probably be maybe more accurate to describe it as a symbol or a representation of fate. But I will say, I like where you're kind of going with this idea. I sort of felt that it represented like reality versus illusion, right? What is versus what it seems. So you know what I mean? Like the contrast here, nothing almost seems miracles but misery. So I think there's a few different contrasts of what things appear to be versus what they are. And this goes back to the idea of nothingness. Is it really nothing or is it something? What do things appear to be versus what they are? So I think some really good insight that you guys had on that line, and I think we'll have to put a pin in it for now and go back to it just to see if we can come into any more clarity. Okay, so I did ask everybody if you could take some time to analyze the passage from Act 2, Scene 3, just to kind of highlight what are some of the important aspects of this passage, right? We haven't heard anything from Edgar except for a few lines here and there. All we know is that he is the older brother, he's a legitimate brother, but we don't know him as a person, we don't know his nature. So let's start by talking about this question. How is Edgar's disguising himself as a bedlam beggar an example of social criticism in the play? Why is Edgar's comment, Edgar I nothing am, important to the meaning of the play? So first of all, any idea on what are some of the social criticisms? And if you don't know, that's okay, because you may not have done research into it, but that's why you have me, because I might be a little bit more familiar with it. Okay, well, maybe I'll take this one. Okay, so some of the social criticisms in the play. I mean, Shakespeare has been known to present, I would say, like racist stereotypes in many of his plays. So it's kind of interesting to see that he would maybe show a soft side to the destitute or downtrodden. But I think that Edgar begins to represent something beyond himself. Okay, so in the 1590s and the early 1600s in England, when Shakespeare was writing these plays, excuse me, they're going through a social economic depression. Okay, there's a lot of poverty, especially in the rural communities. People are poor, they're dispossessed, and it's like the tale as old as time. You've got people in the city, the ones that are the haves versus the have-nots. But it became a very big social problem to have such poverty and dispossessed people in rural communities, okay? And what happens is people in rural communities, they come into larger cities and communities. So the idea of this unaccommodated man, which is what Edgar represents, is essentially people who are exposed and vulnerable for a number of reasons, whether it is mental health, whether it is because they're marginalized economically, whether they are socially dispossessed by, let's say, being women or minorities. All of these things are important, especially for a king to consider, right? The well-being of all of his people. So it seems that Edgar takes on this identity so he can become invisible, which is, I think, what some of the social criticism is. And it's actually very relevant in a modern context, right? That people who are on or who are in, lower income areas, lack education and opportunity, they become marginalized. They become more of the dispossessed, invisible people in our society. Something else that I think was important that we did mention is even the view of mental illness at the time, right? So he uses this, he feigns this mental illness in order to, again, become invisible to the people around him. What it ends up doing, it becomes very painful for the audience to see Edgar, who's feigning madness, who's pretending to be mad, versus Lear, who's actually experiencing genuine insanity, right? So when we're looking also at some of the Fool's comments, they don't just necessarily address Lear. I think they address the selfishness of humanity in general. Now, you may not have understood that from reading this passage, but I think it's important that we go back and develop our ideas a little bit further, okay? So, let me just look here. Okay, good. Let's just have a little look here at some of the devices that you found. I think that's important to start with that. So when we're reading this, what were some of the major images that appealed to you, that gave you some insight into understanding the passage?
I think I noticed a little bit of nature imagery. Like in the beginning, he says, by the happy hollow of the tree, and then later on he's like, the winds and persecution of the sky. And I think that's supposed to, not only is it supposed to like link him to his father, Gloucester, who is like superstitious and believes in nature and stuff, I think it's supposed to like help parallel him to Edmund, like, because in Edmund's soliloquy he talks about nature as well, and he's saying that he like sort of he says nature can judge him. And it's like both of these brothers are abandoned by their father at some point or another, and like all they have left is nature to turn to.
Oh, I love that. Great idea, right? Like he's literally hiding in the hollow of a tree to try to seek protection from the environment around him. And the way that he conjures nature versus his brother is extremely dramatically different, right? Okay, very good. Even just to see, I think Say is mentioning some of this, some of the images that he covers himself with dirt. Yes, so that people suffering from mental illness were believed to be possessed by evil spirits during Shakespeare's time and unable to feel pain, hence self-mutilation as part of the disguise of Edgar. Yeah, so when he says, I'll grime with filth, blanket my loins, elf all my hairs in knots, and with presented nakedness outface the winds and persecutions of the sky. Absolutely. There is, and then further down, strike in their numbed and mortified bare arms, pins, wooden pricks, nails, sprigs of rosemary, with horrible objects from low farms, poor pelting villages, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of talk in the play and even later about violence to the body, injury to the body, and I think a lot of this is to mimic Lear's own feelings of torment from the treatment he experiences from his daughters. Now Edgar feels that same painful torment, not even understanding, like he still doesn't know why his father is upset with him. He has no idea that his brother betrayed him. He just knows that now he's going to be hunted down to be murdered, and he doesn't understand why. So he's just trying to hide. He's going into survival mode. Right, okay, good. So the beggars who are from the insane asylums have something to call themselves. They call themselves Poor Tom, unlike Edgar, who now has nothing. Very good. So when he says Edgar, I nothing am, he is reducing himself to nothingness, getting rid of that old identity in order to assume something that is essentially invisible. Okay, very good. So lots of good imagery about these natural things, but also the images of violence to the body. Were there any other images that you could see? Or, I mean, we could move on beyond that, talk a little bit about, like, what is his tone when saying this? You know, do, I heard myself proclaimed, and by the happy hollow of a tree escaped the hunt. Like, how is he saying this? He's being hunted by his own father. So what are some good tone words that we could use to describe how he feels right now?
He's like persuading the people, like he wants people to feel for him.
I think in a way you're right that he is very persuasive, but don't forget he doesn't actually, like, the actor knows that he's saying a soliloquy, but if we're looking at him as a character, I don't know if he necessarily is trying to persuade anybody, maybe himself. But I think that the very nature, like, because he is appealing to our emotions so much, that it is very persuasive. We do feel very bad for him, and that feeling of feeling bad for him is pathos. So Tanya, you are right. We're just going to twist it a little bit. I think pathos is a really good device that we, the audience, feels from his experience. So very good. Okay, so we have here unsettled, desperate, fearful, hopeless, ignored from both society and family. Very good. Pleading, terrified, and distressed. I think all of these tones are really accurately describe how he's feeling. Okay, great. So beyond pathos, how do you feel when reading this? Like, what mood is created in you? I know you have to kind of imagine that this is really happening, that this is his experience. But how would you feel? How do you feel as the reader about this? Besides sympathetic, we've already said that. excellent. Thank you for that. I think definitely there's contempt in, how we feel. Anyone else?
All of the treatment that I've been right now is part that
Jade, I hate to interrupt you. Your microphone it's muffled. Could you repeat that if you don't mind?
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
That's better, yes.
Okay. So I basically said, so the readers will also have a condemning feeling towards the actions and what others receiving the treatment towards others is just caused by Edmund's actions.
Okay, so condemnation. Okay, I like that. What other devices did we find here, everybody? Because this is really good practice for upcoming test. So we've got imagery, we've got tone and mood. Let me just see what Say says here. So his decision to disguise also parallels the lack of sanity that seems to surround Lear, but we don't really know that yet. So once you read the whole play, you could say that perhaps there is some foreshadowing that if Edgar becomes nothing, like what do we think is foreshadowed? That his experience will parallel Lear's. That is foreshadowing, so that works. Ceases to be Edgar, while Edgar dresses himself in insanity. Okay, yeah, I can definitely get behind that. So the idea of the characters paralleling each other, the madness is foreshadowed, so his madness parallels Lear's foreshadowed madness. Good. Setting. So Jeffrey, let's talk about the setting. What is important about the setting? What does the setting help us to understand about this passage or about the importance of this? Anyone want to talk about the setting? Okay, the idea that he is, well, that could also be conflict too, if he's being chased, right? It's sort of like his father against him, so that reveals that there's conflict. This setting, the idea of him going back to nature, that he is trying to seek refuge by hiding actually like in a tree or in a cave. So he's going from this position of status and privilege, and
Hey,
now
miss.
Hi, Vincenzo.
Sorry I'm late.
No problem. I'm just going to have to update the attendance. So I think that's important too, just about his position from being one of privilege, living in a castle, and now he's living in a tree. So yeah, I think the setting is important, and there's also conflict between himself and his brother and his family, so that's good. Okay, Sabrina, did you want to talk a little bit about the diction? You had mentioned diction.
Yeah, on line 7, he says to take the basest and most poorest shape, and I was like, because that like ties him back to Edmund, and it's like a role reversal, because Edmund's like now on top, even though he's like the bastard, the base child, and like yeah, and Edgar, like he's using basest like to mean lowly, but also I think Shakespeare wanted to like link the brothers back together again, because now he's on the bottom, and like even though he's like quote unquote legitimate, he's like the worst child.
Well, absolutely. Because we look at one brother who we have an immense amount of sympathy for, and the other one who we see is a total manipulator. And you know what? For Edmund, or for Edgar, now he has a taste of what it feels like to be completely rejected by society, just like Edmund has felt his whole life. Okay. So the use of nakedness demonstrates a naturalness which suggests that beggars were viewed as vulnerable and mad. Yes. Is it nakedness more a symbol of naturalness? Well, he's like the unaccommodated man. So I guess man before there was social decorum where you had to wear clothing. So being unaccommodated is probably the ultimate freedom. But that'd be very unsettling for me to be ultimately free by being naked. Maybe thousands of years ago, but I think for all of us, that would be like our worst nightmare coming true, right? But again, that enables Edgar to hide in by people perceiving him to be mad and therefore neglected by society. Okay, so he sees nature as a secure place for refuge, but even in nature, he is still disguised. Yes, and I mean, I hope you know that what's coming is an eventual meeting of the two minds, and Edgar and Lear are actually going to have some time together. Okay, so anyone else want to add? I think even if you talked about the motif of nothingness, the very last line, him saying, Edgar, I nothing am, that he has given up his title, his privilege, his land, he's been forced into it. And that does parallel Lear also, right? Giving up all of his titles, as the Fool so aptly said yesterday when we were reading it, Tao gave away all the titles that was born with. And this is him forcing himself to become nothing in order to survive. And the motif of nothingness we see once again here. Okay, so overall, I think it kind of seems like Edgar will be going down from here on. He will. It's going to get worse, but you have to remember the Wheel of Fortune is going to alter itself and things will change around. This is going in the reverse that most Shakespearean tragedies experience, right? We talked about that, where we usually look at the rise of the tragic hero, but now we're looking at the fall of the tragic hero, and hopefully that there will be a change, after Act 3. So just from this little passage, we've looked at, how many devices? Imagery, diction, tone, mood. We've looked at in nature being a symbol or a metaphor. We've looked at the setting, what's revealed about his character. We've talked about foreshadowing, parallels from the subplot to the main plot. We've talked about conflict, all of these different things that we can find in this passage. And this is a much longer passage. In your test scenario, I'm looking for you to probably identify like 3 or 4 devices for each one of those passages. So we've gone above and beyond in just this little passage. But essentially, this is what you're going to have to do for your test. It'll just be a smaller quotation. Okay, so Edgar is the one that says, we're not talking about that yet. Don't go spoil the plot for us. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I say let's move on to Act 2, Scene 4. Anyone have questions?
Miss, sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
I just want to ask you, could you explain the nature imagery aspect again? Because I'm kind of confused. Because in the soliloquy, like some parts, it feels like Edgar is looking at nature as his protector, but then he also says winds and persecutions of the sky. Like I feel like I feel like he's contradicting himself. We don't really understand it.
Okay, well, I think in some ways that he sort of is, he's showing, I think this reinforces the concept of duality that we talked about, okay? So that people can have dual natures, nature itself can have dual purposes, dual existences, if you will. So nature is going to be his refuge, but it's also, because he doesn't have protection, he's extremely vulnerable to nature. So it shows a duality, right? Just like his brother, you would think his own flesh and blood would be loyal to him. But the duality of Edmund is that he is selfish, Machiavellian, self-serving, ambitious. He's got a duality of character. Lear, seemingly this loving father to one daughter, and like, is he this old man who just wants to be taken care of, or is he dragon with wrath, do you see? So they're paralleling, I think, the duality of how particular things exist, having two sides. That would be my interpretation.
Thank you, Miss. That makes a lot more sense.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, please. Yes, absolutely. And in this play, I think that's one of the things that we're going to see. Now, you're not going to see this all the time, right? But in this play in particular, there's a lot of duality. Like, even when we were reading Gloucester's scene yesterday, remember the doubling of language? Let's see. I'm trying to look for it right now. Tis true, or whatever he said two times, just for emphasis. So I think it's also to show the dual nature of people, depending on what type of, oh, here it is. Oh, madam, my old heart is cracked. It's cracked, right? Tis too bad. So it is showing, I think, the duality of nature, showing the duality of character. It also tends to contrast, right? Like seeing versus blindness, and how each character is eventually, like, either they grow into a sense of being able to see when they were once blind, or maybe characters who were once able to see become blind. It's most certainly, I think, an integral part to this play, and just how things don't always seem as they are. There's two sides to everything, right? Lear is a kind old man. He's dragging with his wrath. And we're going to see that. The fool is a ridiculous jokester, but he's also quite an intellectual and provides a lot of, I think, important lessons to Lear. And you wouldn't expect, it's like the class clown teaching all of us life lessons. You don't always expect that. And even Sabrina talking about how nature was presented from Edmund's point of view and how nature is presented now, right? How they're conjured in different ways. So I think you guys have a really astute understanding of these ideas, and I think that's really, really amazing. So good job on that. Yes. Yeah, the only thing is, well, yeah, because characters point out, I would say, the flaws in others. Like a foil would be what shows up at the opposite in the other character. So in that sense, you could look at it as a type of duality. Yes. Right? Because Edmund is a foil for Edgar. Cordelia is a foil for the sisters. So you see that they just represent the opposites in each other. Okay, so another question here is, does this quote show character development, since we can see Edgar grows from an easily manipulated fool to a man who is wise enough to do anything to preserve his life? Absolutely. Now, whether you call that character, I would call that more accurately, you're right, character development, because we actually don't know what he was like before. But if you said that what is revealed about his character, because that's a different type of device, that's someone who maybe has some sort of realization versus something that is developed. There's a slight difference, but I think that's also a wonderful device that you, and when in doubt, you can always talk about what that quote reveals about a character. What do we learn from them, from that particular quote? And I do want you to know that I'm going to pick quotations that are rich with a lot of devices. I'm not going to pick something obscure that, for instance, hail to thee, noble master. What can you say about that? You can't say much about that, but most certainly having like a juicy chunk of soliloquy or some sort of, sort of detail that you can really develop. Those are the quotes I'm going to pick, not something obscure that we have never talked about. Okay? So very good. Any other questions? I love them. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great. Okay, then let's start by reading Act 2, Scene 4. And things are basically going to start getting worse and worse, just to prep you for that. Okay, so Lear, accompanied by the fool, arrives at Gloucester's house, where he finds Kent in the stocks and hears how he has been treated. Lear goes to find Regan, leaving the fool and Kent to talk about their situation until the king returns with Gloucester, who tells him that Regan is refusing to see her father. At first, Lear excuses her, but soon his anger increases and he demands her presence. Regan and Cornwall come out to meet Lear, and Kent is released from the stocks. Lear describes Goneril's unkindness and his curse on her. Suddenly, Goneril herself arrives, and the two sisters join to oppose their father. They try to force him to reduce his train of attendants so that he will be completely dependent on his daughters. A distant storm is heard. So talk about pathetic fallacy, right? The storm, what is that supposed to reflect in Lear? His brewing madness. Maddened, Lear rushes from the stage, taking Kent and the fool with him. Gloucester follows them, but returns to tell how the king has disappeared into the stormy night. Cornwall demands Gloucester to lock all the gates. So it goes from seemingly, reducing your father's knights by 50 to, at the end of the scene, you are literally locking the doors, so you can't even let an old man into your castle to be protected from the elements. So this is what their relationship has resulted in at this point. Okay, so can I please have someone to volunteer to be King Lear?
I can read for Lear.
Thank you. I mean, the other option, people, is that you read this by yourself and you know you A, won't, and B, it'll be very boring. More boring than reading it together. I need a gentleman.
Can I be the gentleman, please?
Sure. Kent.
I'll do it, miss.
Thank you. The Fool.
I would like to have that.
Okay, Roosh, thank you.
All right, no problem.
Okay, Regan.
I can do it.
Thank you. Cornwall.
I can do it, miss.
Thank you. Goneril. I think Jade is trying to communicate with us, but her microphone is not working. So Jade, if that's you, we can't hear you.
Can I be Goneril?
Thank you, Ryan. That would be great. I think that is everyone. Did I miss anybody? Do we have Gloucester?
I can do it.
Thanks, Tanya. Okay, wonderful. Let's get started.
'Tis strange that they should so depart from home, and not send back my messenger.
As I learned the night before, there was no purpose in them. Of this remove.
Hail to thee, noble master.
Ha! Makest thou this shame thy pastime?
No, my lord.